Thank you all for coming. I know it's very difficult at this time to come out of our offices and to venture out into the world. So I appreciate you all taking the time to come and visit me today. So I just want to start today by talking to a couple of ideas that really were filtering through as I was writing my second book, which is currently at the publisher waiting for the proofs to arrive. So these ideas, there were some things that really started percolating as I was writing the book and made me start to kind of think about a whole range of ideas. And while it's not a core argument of the book, I think it's a really important trajectory that funneled through the entire argument of the book. So I want to start by taking you back to 2012. And a group of students at the University of Manchester who were studying economics, which is in the the School of Social Sciences, released a manifesto that sparked a great deal of controversy, both within and without the British university establishment, where the students claimed that the curriculum taught had failed to meet the standards of the university's own standards for an undergraduate degree. The argument was that the course offerings were all based on neoclassical models of economics that failed to account for diversity of perspectives and to offer radical thinking that would encourage economists to develop deep models of knowing and practicing. So they now argued that this narrow approach to teaching and learning failed to fulfil the university's own graduate outcomes, namely that their education should prepare graduates for citizenship and leadership in diverse global environments. Because the economics curriculum was so heavily skewed, the students argued that they had limited understanding of pluralism and the myriad of factors that contribute to economics modelling and forecasting. Most importantly, the students cited this failure of economics as a global trend, noting that many universities shared this narrow approach to the neoclassical models and were stifling the production of critical and engaged thinking amongst its cohort. So the students cited their own embarrassment. They were ashamed that they were not able to explain the causes and the consequences of the 2008 global financial crash to their friends and family. Obviously, you know what it's like, you're studying a degree and everyone goes, so what do you think about this? And all of a sudden you're supposed to have some sort of expert answer, aren't you? Yes? Well, these students were confronted with this very real situation, this crisis emerging, and their friends and family are saying, hey, what's going on here? And they could not provide an effective or an evocative answer. So this moment of crisis revealed the inadequacies of their education, and they demanded change. They released a manifesto outlining their grievances with their education, supported with a foreword written by Andrew Haldane, who is the chief economist for the Bank of England. They expressed concern about their education, its capacity to shape reflexive and engaged economics graduates, and an ongoing ignorance of the conditions that led to the 2008 global financial crisis. These concerns are mirrored by other commentators who express discomfort at the place and the role of economics in shaping and defining government at all levels, as well as core principles of democracy. This is because, of course, over the 20th century, that from a position of relative marginality, economists have edged their way into holding essential expertise to manage, shape, frame political and social institutions. In the United Kingdom, for example, there are now twice as many economists employed in the civil service than there are other social researchers. These numbers have been motivated by the increasing obscuring and technologising of economic knowledge to generate more rigorous and scientific grounding for the discipline. The scientisation of economics serves to distance it very often from its social sciences origin in order to harden and technicise its study and application. Analysts assert that students are being surrounded by a series of diagrammatical and mathematical models that frame economic issues as purely mechanical problems with clear right or wrong answers without adequate understanding of social context, the complexities of human desire, subjectivities and interpersonal politics. The neoclassical approaches limit independent research and abstract thinking. These claims are supported by quantitative research into journal citations in the 1990s, which found that merely 10% of citations that 5 first-tier economics journals made between 1995 and 1997 were interdisciplinary, and the majority of those went to finance. Such narrowness in citation demonstrates a tendency towards intellectual closure. And this is cause for concern when economics provides this framework for contemporary decision-making. So, what did the students do? They created the Manchester University Postcrash Economics Society. What a fantastic name. I want to join right now just because of the name, quite frankly. Very clever. So they were really interested in forming a collective, forming a student organisation that could lobby for change, because they found enormous resistance to their desire to have the curriculum changed, because their faculty was filled out with neoclassical economists. And they obviously did not want to change. They wanted to dictate what kind of curriculum was being taught. The students were saying, we need more knowledge, we need other ways of thinking. So they formed this awesome society, okay? They hold seminars, they hold public meetings, they protest, they organise, they lobby their faculty to get their curriculum changed. They haven't necessarily had a great deal of success, but they are present, they are vocal, they are visible. They've created some really interesting outside seminars. For example, there's one called Bubbles, Panics and Crashes that you can do. Okay, and apparently they had like 60 people show up to this not-for-credit seminar that was run outside of their curriculum. So they're doing some really interesting things. So what they're designed to do and what they're really interested in is this question that was asked immediately in the post-2008 moment. Why did the economists not predict the 2008 financial crash? And actually there's some stuff that they just deny that they didn't predict it. They just pretend that they did. Like, it's awesome. Like, you read this stuff and they're like, oh yeah, we knew it was going to happen. It's like, no, you didn't. Right? So there's this kind of really weird interaction going on around this claim of knowledge at this particular time. So the failure of the experts to foresee or to take responsibility for this crisis represents a global post-content hierarchy, where people in power and institutional authorities simply exist as a placeholder for that power without actually possessing qualifications, the will, the ability to act with authority, integrity or accountability. Baudrillard confirms these victories of form and interface management over content and information literacies. So there's this cultivation of this elitism that nestles inside of kernels of post-content expertise to form an alliance where scholarly thinking and critical consciousness are divorced from authority and from the real conditions within which people live their lives. There is widening scepticism directed towards the infrastructures of information, education, knowledge and expertise that frame the truth-telling mechanisms of our reality and service our lingering enlightenment and neoliberal visions of modernity, social mobility and justice. In the age of information battles raging over what it means to be informed, accusations of ignorance aim to demean the uneducated, underinformed or illiterate, while simultaneously scepticism and mistrust is directed towards elite experts. And we find this kind of kernel of trouble and difficulty in this creation of the post-crash economic society, this struggle over what it means to know, how we know, when we know, and in what way we know. So this idea, this kind of idea of this shock that this economics experts weren't able to predict, it happens again. It happens again. 2016. Shock. What the hell happened? Nobody predicts Trump. Nobody. Except a few, very few. Okay? So there's this shock. There's this accusation of, how did this happen? How did we get here? What's going on? And we're still reeling from it. We're reeling from it every single day. Okay? The other shock then happens. Brexit. Oh my God, how did this happen? What were they thinking? What's going on here? All right, so again, the experts are caught unawares. They had no framework for predicting these radical eruptions, and instead blame has been levelled at the stupidity and the ignorance of voters. And in particular, this connection between ignorance accompanied by the assertion of inevitable racism and the sexism that accompanies this perceived stupidity. My personal favourite, you can't get much more direct than that, I think. I haven't read it. I really just don't know if I could, quite frankly. It would be quite a challenge, I think. And of course, there's evidence to support these assertions, and we see it, don't we? Yeah? Now, something doesn't sit quite right with me. Now, I know for many of us, a lot of things don't sit quite right with you during this quite controversial time that we're living with. But when I was reading this stuff, when I was thinking about this stuff, I was like, yeah, this is me being uncomfortable. I don't know. This doesn't seem and sit right with me. Now, I have to admit, even a couple of years ago when I wrote my first book, was kind of still working through these ideas. And even I kind of strayed down this path a little bit. When I wrote this, Leave voters, I'm talking about Brexit here, were those who struggled to access the material benefits of empire but reified sense of identity anchored in imperial greatness. So I'm like going, well, why did they vote for Brexit? Oh, they just want empire. And this is a common argument. They just really want to reclaim that empire. I kind of think I'm wrong here. Kind of think I'm a bit wrong now. Not entirely wrong, because, you know, that would be incredibly humbling if I was entirely wrong, but I'm a little bit wrong, all right? So the implication here is that Trump voters and their kin in the Brexit vote responded because they were stuck in the past pining for a great America or a resurgent empire, and their deprivation is a result of their clinging to this lost past and not embracing a cosmopolitan, multi-literate, groovy cosmopolitan now. The truth, I think, is far different, or quite different. These communities are often quite entrenched in diversity, quite entrenched in different ways of thinking, quite entrenched in a whole range of complexities. To simply say that they are this way, that they are pining for a greatness, that they are locked in a past, that they don't have any sense of a modern global now, doesn't work. Just doesn't sit right with me. I think there's greater complexity going on here. And I think to accuse them of racism and sexism is a really simple, arbitrary answer. And yeah, they probably are a little bit. But I think there's more going on here than that. So in order to kind of think this through a little bit and to kind of really articulate my discomfort is this accompanying realisation that we're all more educated than we've ever been, right? More people are going to university than at any other time in history, right? So we've got this data here, okay? In Australia in 2016, close to a quarter of 24% of youths and adults have completed a bachelor degree, up from 18% a decade ago. In the United Kingdom, 14% of school leavers are attending university, is a dramatic increase of up to 40% in 2016. People are always saying now, high school's not enough. Even now an undergraduate degree is not enough. You have to do postgraduate. Yeah? Yeah, it's like we're increasing the bar all the time. Get more and more education. So how can we have this parallel argument going on? People are stupid, but they're now more educated than they've ever been before. Now, the caveat, the footnote, is literacy. All right? The footnote down that trajectory is literacy, and that's really important. I just want to flag that. That's actually, that's part of the answer, is what is literacy, yes? Okay, understanding how to interpret, how to encode, how to decode, yes? But this accusation of ignorance flies when the unexpected and the socially tremulous conditions erupt. What is also surprising is that it's not currently being levelled at teachers and schools, which most often it is. The target now, of course, is white voters, particularly poor white voters, okay? But there's something more that we need to discuss, and in order to help me work through this, I had to do a bit of a turn, did you see that? Into criminology of all places, would you believe? I know. I want to introduce you to the ultra-realists. They are so cool. If you're going to call like your field ultra-realism, that's some coolness factor right there, right? Yeah? Like I work in ultra-realism. Not just realism, ultra-realism. Okay, so who are these people? Okay, so the two core kind of theorists in the field, and there are many others now because it's increasingly growing in size. Two dudes, it's always two dudes, right? Simon Wilnow and Steve Hall, all right? And basically, in a nutshell, and I'm not a criminologist, so I'm you know, shrinking all of this down quite significantly, they took issue with a very binarised approach within criminology. So there's the positive school and there's the classical school within criminology, okay? Very, very simply, hang on, we won't go there yet. Okay, very simply, the classical criminologist claims that humans commit crimes because they're just shit. They're just not good. Humans are problematic. They commit crimes because of deviancy. And we need to correct and shape and frame that and put in punitive measures to stop you from being deviant, because if we let you, you would be, wouldn't you? Yes? The positive side, they go, well, people aren't really that bad. It's just because they're poor and dispossessed and they can't really help it when they commit crime. So these two kind of schools, and they kind of battle each other. They kind of battle each other. And these guys were going, look, this is all well and good, but it's not enough. We need something more complicated. And so this is where they came up with this idea of ultra-realism to offer a more deeper critique. So, for example, the 2011 riots in London, remember that? Yeah, where they all tried to burn down London? People were going, oh, you know, these hooligans, deviant young people wearing hoodies, hooligans, let's lock them up. They're poor people, they don't look, they're just angry, they don't really understand. Oh, it's okay, be nice to them. Steve Hall and Simon Will actually went and talked to them. They went and talked to them. And you know what they found out? They just wanted stuff. It wasn't rage against the machine. It wasn't we're trying to tear down the inequalities of the social system. It's just a chance to get some stuff. We're just going to go get some stuff. Yeah? So what these guys do is they actually go and they actually immerse themselves in these communities and they talk to them. And they really kind of pull out some really uncomfortable truths and uncomfortable positionings. And they argue that sometimes the tools that we use to make sense of these social contexts, the tools that we deploy, these can place blinkers upon us. These can corrode and shape and frame and skew what we understand as the real experience of these people on the ground in their everyday lives. And so I thought this was really interesting. I thought that this was quite an interesting approach, because what we now start to see when we can deploy these kind of ideas is that we get a far more nuanced picture. We don't revert back to this reactionary, it's either this or that response that is happening within the frame that we understand right here, right now. They were finding another way to understand these ideas. All right? So, when they spoke to Brexit voters in the north of England, they discovered something quite different to the rhetoric of racism motivated by ignorance amongst these communities. They mapped the very real conditions of dispossession that have been borne by these communities over successive, both conservative and progressive governments that have decimated their lives. Their issues were with the impacts and the effects of capitalism and the mercenary conditions that it promotes. That was what they were reacting to. It wasn't an ignorant, we hate black people response. It was a response to the oppressions, the difficulties, and the dispossessions of capitalism, and also the fact that capitalism expects, requires you to be racist, to be sexist. It asks you to do these things. And in fact, you do quite well if you're not racist and sexist. Okay? So this is a quote, this is what they found in the north of England. We saw precious little fruits of privilege on display on the housing estates of the Midlands and North of England, nor did our respondents seek to return to an age of empire. For the most part, our respondents knew little or nothing about the British Empire. They didn't talk longingly of it because they didn't talk about it at all. Their concerns were about the present and the future. So this begins to kind of shape things and show us the gaps in our knowledge, show us the gaps in our understanding, in our theoretical frameworks. Yeah? And so what they did was they acknowledged that, yes, many of the people they spoke to did have racist responses. Yes, they did. But it was only a partial component of the picture. What is often missing from this lens of analysis is the role of capitalism in creating the conditions for what is called a paranoic economy. A paranoic, so paranoid economy. This idea of, I'm against you. You want that job? Well, I want that job as well. You're taking away from me. These immigrants are taking my job. This is powerful, emotional, reactionary stuff. And we need a literacy to be able to understand that. Paranoia and willful ignorance cultivates a rejection of expertise in favour of responsiveness, opinion and experiential rejoinders in contemporary interactions. And this manifests in a malignment of education to produce anything other than tradable skills for immediate use in a changeable economy. Temporalities of change and histories of heritage are marginalised as outmoded and irrelevant to immediate needs. No internal world or complex subjectivity can be conjured in this information space. This is not a crisis of information, nor what people know at any one time in history. Rather, it is an ambivalence towards expertise and knowing, or as Nichols frames it, an indifference to established knowledge, which morphs into a positive hostility to that knowledge, because that knowledge has been used to dispossess, to take away from people who feel powerless. This hostility is propelled by the crumbling currencies of formal education, through which success, prosperity and social mobility are no longer accessible, or no longer easily accessible. The rising cascade of unstable employment structures means that the privileges of credentialing ring hollow in the current neoliberal marketplace. Expertise has demonstrated itself to be unreliable, askance and wrong. This awkward relationship to knowledge is a crisis of memory in a time when there is an abundance of records, archives, resources, but uneven skills with which to access and interpret them. So it's in this context that we get the rise of the right, which we're seeing across the globe. Yeah, and we're all, I'm sure, quite disturbed by it. And it's a failure. It's a failure to think differently. It's a failure to think radically. It's a failure to intervene and to be transformative in the knowing, to face uncomfortable truths. So, most often it's the failure to heed the warning of previous scholars, because we've been warned. Warned and warned and warned and warned. Knowledge Factor was published in 1992. Roll over Beethoven, 1990. We've been warned about the crisis in education, the crisis in universities, over and over and over again. It's not good. This is going to be a problem. And particularly the role of humanities in intervening in that. in making change. So it's a failure in many respects, and I'm sure you will all have your understandings or perspectives on what you think the failure is, or even if there is a failure, you might think, no, we're doing fine, and that's all well and good, okay? But to me, there's a failure, and it's a failure that we see when everyone stands back and go, huh? How did Trump get elected? The fact that we don't have the tools, we don't have the knowledge to actually frame it in a radical, grounded, transformative way, we just go, oh, they were stupid, they were ignorant. This is a problem. They were racist. This is a problem. We need to think bigger than those reactionary responses. And it may be a really uncomfortable real that we are then confronted with, that we may not like. And that's okay. That's okay. Right, so I'm thinking there's some questions, and I like these questions that Henry Giraud asks. What happens to a society when thinking is eviscerated and disdained in favour of raw emotion? What happens when a time becomes a burden for most people and surviving becomes more crucial than trying to lead a life with dignity? And we've all been confronted with that with COVID. Oh, survival. All of a sudden, survival. What happens when people go into survival mode? What does that mean? How do we behave? What happens to a social order ruled by an economics of contempt that blames the poor for their condition and wallows in a culture of shaming? What happens to a polity when it retreats into private silos and is no longer able to connect personal suffering with larger social issues? I think these are really important questions, and I'm sure you will have your own questions as well. So there's hope, though. I think there's some really interesting things happening. There's some really interesting scholarship. There's physical cultural studies at the University of Maryland. How cool is that? Physical cultural studies. Thinking about movement, mobility, time, space, corporeal experiences. I think that's really interesting. We have the post-digital cultures. Yeah, this is at the University of Coventry. How interesting is that? Cool stuff is happening. My personal favourite, which I'm so excited about, the Extreme Anthropology Research Network. How cool is that? And there's even a journal. Look, it's open access. Go, submit something, do something interesting. It runs out of Norway, of all places. How great is that? Okay? So we need to generate change. We need to continue to make relevant interventions into ideas that motivate us in the everyday real. And we need to think about our relationship to society, to our students, and take lessons from the post-crash economic society, which now has over 18 affiliates worldwide. Okay? And they're all demanding better from their economics education. So my question is, what do you want to do better? What do you want out of your education? What do you want from the humanities? What do you think you can offer me, you, the students that you teach? What do you want to teach? Thank you very much for listening.